up, dudes and dudettes? Welcome back to Just a Dude podcast. Today we're diving into something I know you've all felt. Why does it seem like everyone's pissed off all the time? Social media, news, even your uncle at Thanksgiving. It's outrage city out there. Today, we're talking to David Beckemeyer, a retired tech guy, internet pioneer from the dial-up days, and now the host of Outrage Overload, a podcast about why we're all so wound up and how to maybe, not be. So stick around. We're talking outrage porn, political tribalism, and even a rapid-fire round to test David's chill. Let's get into it. All right, David, welcome to the show. You've got this cool backstory. You're the founding CTO of Earthlink, bringing the internet to regular dudes like me back in the 90s. And trust me, I do remember that. How do you go from that to starting a podcast about outrage?
Yeah, well, thanks, Nathan, for inviting me on the show. Yeah, it is interesting. Nobody, if you ask the people from those days in the 90s, I think they'd be, "You're doing what? You're doing what
Yeah,
now?"
right?
Most of them would be like, "Yeah, that didn't happen," or that can't be the same, David. But yeah, I mean, so I was in tech for a long time, and I ultimately retired from that space. Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area, so I'm not far from Silicon Valley, and I've been sort of entrenched in that world for quite a long time. And I really, frankly, got a little burnt out on that. So I retired from that space, and and then I was playing around with a lot of different other hobbies and things going on. And but also I was caught up in the same sort of politic dynamic that everybody else is. And we sort of had the 2016 elections, and that kind of seemed to get people riled up. And you
Mm-hmm.
saw people getting mad at each other and breaking friendships. And if they defriend them on Facebook, maybe they defriend them in real life, and they wouldn't
Yeah.
talk anymore. And everybody seems to have a story. Uncle so and so is not allowed to Thanksgiving anymore and stuff like that. And then you had 2020 and the pandemic and the lockdowns, and we got in more fights about that. And another wave of that kind of happened again. And that's just been perpetuating. And so I was kind of seeing that in my circles in my life. I was out there getting in Twitter fights over this stuff myself. And, a lot of people in my family and life were. So it's like, okay, hold on. What's going on? So that's kind of led me down that path to kind of research. And I've discovered all this language and stuff around it now. And I'm kind of a geek and a little bit of a science and tech nerd. So I kind of went down that path on it, right? And I said, well, is somebody sort of researching this phenomenon and what's happening with us? Yeah, and guess what? A bunch of people are. Duh, of course they are.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of science being done on this. So I thought, well, I can bring, some of those scientists and researchers and some of that research, to a general audience. You don't have to be you don't have to be, an academic to sort of understand my show. I
Yeah.
try to bring it in an accessible way. So I thought, okay, I can bring some of that science. There's also a ton of what I call practitioners. So folks there's a bunch of organizations that are sort of working on this. Toxic polarization would be one of the main kind of terms that we use out there. And that's this kind of toxic environment where we really we see right past each other. We're all talking and nobody's listening. And, we can't even appreciate, that anybody thinks the way these people on the other side think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
you're
that's
absolutely right. And we see that, right, David, every day because, we've gone from a country that's like, okay, let's see if we can find common ground to if you're not with me, you're against me. And if you don't see things the same way that I do, then I'm just going to write you off.
Yeah, exactly. There's been this big push over the last, I don't know, it's been a long time. This is like 50 or 60 years, depending on kind of how far you want to go back. But there's been this increased kind of ideological sorting, right? Where and this idea of ideological purity has kind of set in, right? And like you're saying, if you sort of don't follow the tribe the right way, we're going to, cancel you or, whatever language you want to use around that, but you're not going to be a member in good standing of our tribe anymore. You kind of get booted out of the tribe. And it's gotten to the point now that even politicians that try to want to work across the aisle are sort of, we the people, we disincentivize that. We sort of say, no, don't do that. They're evil. Don't talk to them. So
Exactly.
we sort of been selling ourselves this story that the other side is evil. Well, and now we believe it. So what do you expect? You can't go negotiate with evil, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and with all the polarization, especially in politics, the polarization of going one way or the other, and you pick such a steadfast stance that you almost back yourself into a corner, right? I mean,
Yeah.
just to sit there and look and say no, 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 and then when they actually do try to work together, you say, "Why are you working with them?" Well, because technically that's what we're supposed to do, right?
Well, and that's the way the country was designed, right? Like it
Yeah.
wasn't. designed for this kind of partisan world, because that's why things are hard to get done. Like, we complain things can't get done, but that's intentional. Like, the system was designed so it's kind of hard to get things done, so we can avoid things like majority rule and stuff like that, right? Where you have to go build consensus, you have to, come up with things that have broad appeal, stuff like that, right? Well, no one wants to do that. No one wants to do that work. We just want to yell, that our
Yeah.
side should win.
Yep.
We have,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
and I
And
think, go ahead.
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, one thing about doing this show now for almost 3 years is that, you know, I am so much less certain I know stuff than I ever never did before, right? So talking to all these experts and stuff, it really points out how almost everything has more nuance to it. It's more complicated than you think. There's more to that story than you think. Because, we tend to jump very quickly on our sort of tribal position on something, and we really don't even know that much about the issue. We only know what we were told to think. And, and then when you go look at it, if you look in your tribal news sources and your tribal information sources, they're going to support all these ideas that you already think, and you're just going to keep doing that. And that's one thing that I've learned the most. It's probably the biggest thing that's affected me on this show, is now I'm much more like, it's hard for me now to have like a strong opinion about many things, because it's like, maybe I don't know that as well as I think I do. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that came up recently that I think a lot of people are talking about today is this new airplane from Qatar, for that the president's going to accept on behalf of the Department of Defense. And, for me, back in the day, like you said, when I was polarized, I would have been like, no, let's just, let's take it. How often do we give money to other countries and never get anything in return? Right. So let's let somebody give us something for right. But now, because I talk with other people and see other things, I always realize there's more to the story than what we actually see, right? And so you have to start thinking, okay, if it's a gift, are there going to be strings attached? Are they going to ask for things in the future? It's a national security concern, right? Because if they give us a plane that comes from Qatar, we're going to have to rip the whole thing apart to make sure that it's safe. There's no listening devices, no, any of that stuff. So I'm like, it's a double-edged sword. While it's nice to get things that you don't have to pay for and that the taxpayers aren't going to have to pay for once, in the end, is it really going to be worth it? And is it an ethical dilemma? That's the question.
Right. And one thing that this administration seems to like to do is, like, they do things sort of in public. So it's like, well, it must be legal because I'm doing it in public, right? But like,
Yeah.
wait, you'd be complaining to death if this was somebody on the other side doing it. And we're all guilty of this. Like, don't get me wrong. We don't see it when we're doing it. I do a lot of interviews that I call kind of these man on the street interviews, or sometimes I call them street outrage.
Hmm.
And I talk to just regular people. So this is when I'm not talking to a scientist or an academic of some sort, and I'm just talking to regular people, and we talk about a lot of stuff, outrage media and how they're being affected by it, and what is it, and that this kind of thing. And when I get towards the end, I ask questions about, like, what's a hot button issue for you. And this is when everything we just talked about, like, we've been talking for sort of 2 hours about tribal politics and, polarization, and we want to lower the temperature and all this. And then at the end, I asked this hot button question, and all their tribal nature comes
It
out
just
almost
comes
all
right
the time,
back,
right?
right?
And
Yeah.
even though we talked about it, you can't see it when you're doing it. You're just blind to it when you're doing it. And
Yeah.
that's been a big lesson for me. And I'm the same way. I guarantee you, I would be doing the same thing.
Yeah, and me too. I mean, I can back to, as much as I like to say I try to remain neutral and bring the facts just as without a spin on them. We all spin, right? We all do. It's just human nature, to go the way that we want to go with something. But yeah, and I wanted to ask you a question because you talked about the different outrage, social media. One thing that I came across on your site was outrage porn. Now, I have an idea that it sounds spicy, but I'm guessing it's really not, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I like the term, although I think it probably, you could get you banned on YouTube or something, probably. But
Right.
other people, it's kind of what you've also seen people talk about, the idea of like rage bait. I think it's similar. One reason I like the term, because outrage, and it has both. It has outrage and porn. So on the outrage side, it's about it's about triggering these emotions, right? Moral indignation, anger, kind of the most common ones, right? And so that's one side of it, is triggering these emotions. But I like the porn side word too, because it's also like, we're addicted to it. Like, we want this stuff. We seek it out. And, you know, you can't blame the social media and everybody for giving it to us if we're out there seeking it out, right? I mean, we're feeding the
Exactly.
algorithms and telling them what we want, and so they give it to us, right? And so I think that's a piece of it, is you sort of can kind of get addicted to this, right? Where, I'm going to tune in to Rachel Maddow tonight because I got to hear, what she's going to do. And then, but I leave Rachel Maddow and I'm super mad now.
Exactly.
but I still do it. Or, if it's not Rachel Maddow, it's Tucker Carlson or who knows, whatever, right?
Exactly. Whoever it is, whatever side, right? Because you sit there and you go, oh, I wonder what happened today. How are they going to, what's their take on this? And then you get away and you're like, I can't believe that side's doing this, or I can't believe this side's doing that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We do. We look for it, don't we?
Yeah, you can fall into it. And that's a big piece of what I try to talk about on the show is kind of just having a lens for it. Like, if you want to go tune into a program like that, okay, I still don't really recommend it that much, but okay. Just realize they are in any news program, actually, and especially if it's sort of an opinion type piece and also news media and social media, like just go in with that lens that they are going to try to get you mad. Like they're going to say the thing that gets you mad, right? So if you go in with that lens, that can help a little bit because then you can keep asking that question that we raised at the beginning. Like, is there more to this story? I bet there's more to this story because there almost always is more to that story.
And you know what? That's probably one of my favorite posts online when I see something and I know that there's stuff missing from a story just because I maybe have read another one or saw a different take. That's my favorite post to kind of, troll folks is to say, and now the rest of the story,
Yeah.
because it seems like we always pick the side that's going to support what we want, what our values are or views are. But in the end, we're always missing something, right? It's never the 100% truth.
Yeah, most often yeah, exactly. There are going to be some things left out. Like, we talk about, trust in media and stuff and trust in the news and they're telling lies. Well, that happens. Sure, that happens
Hmm.
sometimes, but it's much more often is what you're talking about is that just some stuff got left out to spin the narrative they wanted to create.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's where, it can be there. Is it a lie? It's not really a lie, but they did leave some stuff
Yeah, it
out
was
that might
just
have
an
changed.
omission. Yeah,
It was just an
exactly.
omission. Yeah.
That's
But
all.
and that's why, and I'm saying it's a heavy lift on people. And it's terrible that we have to deal with this because it's not easy, right? Because a lot of times people say, well, read some left things from the left and things from the right. A,
Mhm.
that's a bunch of work. I got to read 2 stories now to get the story,
Exactly.
right? Or maybe 3 or 4, right? So it's a lot of work. And B, even that sometimes doesn't really get you there because just people are covering different topics. So even those editorial choices can kind of present a little bit of a biased picture of the world because they're just leaving entire stories out. Like they don't,
Exactly.
that just that didn't make it into the editorial calendar. And we're all guilty of that. I mean, I have an editorial calendar. You have an editorial calendar.
Mhm.
You're leaving stuff out. I'm making decisions. So I'm always trying to be aware of that at least, right? And I have a network of folks that are spread across the political spectrum, and I'll try to reach out and say, hey, how should I handle? I'm handling this topic like this. Do you think I'm bringing too much of my bias or whatever? So I try to. That doesn't mean I'm getting it right, but at least I'm
Yeah,
trying.
and you know what? And that's what I gotta commend you on that, David, because the fact that you're trying to, come at it from, like, a neutral point of view, right? And just tell the facts and get people information out there and have people understand where their bias comes from. I think that's huge because, we are stuck so much in our little bubbles that we really need to break those bubbles and come back out of them, you know?
Yeah, and it's getting to the point where like facts themselves are polarized and weaponized, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's really tough. Like my show is part of the is a Connors Institute podcast, right? And Connors Institute is out of Shippensburg University, and their main mission, their sort of paired mission is providing quality information in a nonpartisan way and protecting democracy, right? Well, that alone can start to trigger polarizing things for people, right? I mean, people
Yeah.
see everything as polarizing these days. And so even the fact that that they're going to provide information and they're going to talk about fact checking and misinformation and I mean and they try to do it in a very nonpartisan way. I mean, they hammer Republicans and Democrats and all that kind of thing, but that doesn't clear you. Like you're still going to get people that say you are part of the deep state or you are part of the misinformation engine yourself, and it's really tough. I mean, it's really tough, and you can do your best at it and still and you can't make everybody happy, but are you even, and it still can be really hard to really us to get a shared truth, and a shared, because so much of it is trust. And then also it's our bubble, like you say, it's our information bubble where we're filtering that information so much more than we realize we are, that
Yep.
we don't see the same thing in the same event at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing where I think a lot of people, where I think our media, we might get into this next, but a lot of our media are now pushing on our emotions more than our, logical thinking, because they want you to be emotional. They want you to get out there, talk about things, talk about them, right? And in the end, any media source, and I'm not talking about, like us independent podcasters and, other podcast networks, but talking like the big media, right? Their whole thing is they want to get ratings, right? They want to be the best show. So how am I going to get people to come in and listen? I'm going to make them mad, right? Or I'm going to look and hit their heartstrings and try to play on their emotions, because they're, if I just give them the facts, they're not going to, they can get the facts anywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of these marketing, master classes and marketing coaching and things like that, they literally say, not necessarily be politically polarizing, but they
Right.
say you kind of need to be polarizing in some way to get people to sort of plant a flag and take a side, and then but that extends very quickly into political polarization too, right?
It does.
And you see a ton of podcasts starting up. I noticed since this last election, you're seeing a lot of anti-Trump podcasts start up, and it's probably a pretty quick way to capture an audience these days, right? Because people are mad and they're mad about it, and you can be right down that alley. It's much harder to do a show like I'm doing and build an audience,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because people want that polarized perspective, and we try to maybe soften that like up a little bit and say, hey, okay, that sounds pretty bad, but maybe this happened and maybe it wasn't quite as bad as we thought it was, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the tough things that, how do you, well, maybe we'll get to this later, David, but let's cover it now. How do we get people that are so polarized to start thinking in a way that says, okay, hold on, let me stop, think outside of my, my bubble, my beliefs, and start looking at the whole picture? Is there a certain way for us to do that?
Well, I mean, the first part is kind of a mindset, right? It's kind of a mindset that I'm going to be open minded enough to say that maybe I don't have all the answers and maybe my side doesn't have all the answers. I think that's where we're the least critical, right? We don't criticize our own side enough, or we aren't critical thinkers about our own side enough.
Hmm.
We jump on whatever, kind of message is coming out without really, taking much, or especially if it's like, if our side is using these kind of tactics, these anger, rage porn, rage bait, outrage porn tactics, we don't see it because it just seems sort of normal when our side is
Yeah,
doing it, right? And being more aware of that, having some mindfulness about that, that's a big one. And I think that would help things so much if everybody on all sides spent more energy looking in the mirror than they do looking at the other side.
exactly. Exactly. You're absolutely right. And I look at that as my way, and I always say this is, regardless of, like, politically who's in office, I don't care what party they are. It's our job as, citizens and as the people of this country that make it great, to hold all of our elected representatives accountable. Doesn't matter if they have an R behind their name or a D, they all should be held accountable, and to, I would even say, a higher standard than the rest of us, you know?
For sure. Yeah, in terms of practical things people can do, and some of them sound kind of like platitudes, but and you can try them out and see which ones work for you. But people do talk about this idea of multiple information sources, but there are also other ways you can do things. Like what you can do is, you know, I'm going to go deep on a topic this week instead of broad. So instead of maybe reading all the headlines and just moving on, I'm going to pick one topic this week. I'm going to go deeper on that. So I'm going to maybe read 4 articles or even more about that topic. Pick one and just go deep instead of broad. That's one way to start getting a better, wider perspective on things. And it's practical. You can really do it. There are some good sources for, like, if you just want to catch up with the news and get some reasonable quality stuff that's not as infuriating. There's an email list you can subscribe to called 1440 News. People may know about that. If you just Google 1440, it's free. It's ad supported, so you get
Mhm.
ads in the emails,
Yeah.
but it's a good edited list, maybe a 10-minute read each day. Of course, you don't have to read the whole thing every day anyway, but you kind of get a 10-minute overview, and the stuff they're pointing you at, they don't tend to point you at the rage bait stuff, right? Um, and that's a good news source. There's something called Other Web people can try. It's more of a web-based thing, and it's more, you sort of have a bunch of dials and knobs, and you can kind of create your own homepage
Oh,
and work in
nice.
the it has a bunch of dials and knobs you can kind of play with, both not just left and right, but you can look at, there's a bunch of other sliders and things you can kind of play with about reliability and things like that, right? So how are they rated? So you could pick, I want the least reliable stuff and it's all left. You could have that if you
It's all
want, right?
junk.
But
Yeah.
it's all junk. Yeah, you can pick all junk, but you can kind of tweak those knobs a little bit And that's another one, and kind of see if any of those work for you too.
What was the name of that second one, David?
The second one's called Other Web.
Other Web. Okay. I'm
Yeah,
actually
and
writing that down.
you can just Google that and try them out. I mean, they're free. You can kind of play with them and see if they help fill a need a little bit. I think both of them are interesting services. And then there's of course some that are more I would say more narrow. Like there's the flip side that tries to give you a couple of issues, and it gives you like what's happening on the left, what's happening on the right every day. But I think
Yeah.
that's gone to a paid model now. I don't think it's free anymore. I think they have a free level that you get occasional updates from them, but it's not
Yeah.
like daily, or it's not as often. You have to pay.
Gotcha.
There's a
Yep.
few others out there doing that kind of thing that I think are, but that's one way to maybe get a little bit broader news diet. But yeah, a lot of it is mindset, and this
Yeah.
stuff is not easy. Like everybody kind of wants the magic solution, And I was talking about those interviews that I do with regular folks, and this is
Mhm.
not scientific, but I talk to a lot of scientists that do real science. But you know,
Right.
anecdotally, what one thing I've learned from those interviews is that, and this is self-selected people that sort of said they're kind of fed up with the outrage, and they're fed up with the toxic polarization, and they're fed up with all the vitriol and things like that. And when I probe that a little deeper, what I really find is they just want the other person to agree with them. Then they wouldn't have the
Yes.
vitriol, right? And we all kind of want that, I guess. We want kind of everybody to sort of see
Sure. I
things
mean,
like we do.
but yeah, if we had that, then we wouldn't have this polarization, right?
Right,
Because if
exactly.
we
That's
all
how you get
agreed,
rid of if we all agree, we won't
exactly.
have polarization, right? But we also don't have
Yeah.
diversity of thought, and that's probably not
No.
good either. And so
No.
that's
And
where,
yeah.
yeah, I was
And I
just
was
going to say
gonna say,
that's
I was
where
just
things
gonna.
get complicated, right? What we
Yep.
really need to be able to do is deal with that diversity of thought, in better ways. That's what's more
Yeah.
challenging. Sorry, I interrupted.
Absolutely. No. And I think I was just going to go to the same place you were, but yeah, absolutely. One thing that I'm noticing here as a theme, and I saw it on your website too, is that this is really kind of an outrage industry, right? It's not just an idea or a theory; it's literally an industry. But this really probably isn't just Twitter trolls out there, right? It's got to be something bigger, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you could say, I think there doesn't have to be a conspiracy, right? I
Right.
think
Right. Yeah, I'm not going there, but yeah.
one of the journalists I talked to said the biggest conspiracy of all is nobody really knows what the heck they're doing. I think there's some truth to that. But, if you look at, there's just an incentive structure that exists, and we're the consumer, a large guilty party of this. We kind of create this incentive structure. But if you think about social media, you could argue that there was like there's Mr. Burns in the tower, coming up with the idea, but
Yeah.
it's also just kind of water flows downhill, right? So they create these algorithms that gets people going, and then that creates that gets more engagement, and pretty soon it's a freaking cesspool of the worst possible stuff, and so that, and then what do you do now? And they don't want to change that because that's how they make money, is to keep us engaged
Right.
in these platforms. So with social media, they may not have tried to create it that way. It may have been an accident, but that's where we ended up. And maybe we
Yeah.
should have predicted that and thought about it. But now, how do you reform that and still adhere to things like First Amendment and stuff like that? What does that look like? And I'm a big fan of sort of transparency, and that could be a path towards it. But I mean, there's also kind of bottom up. We're going to have to start being more mindful of what we're consuming and how we're consuming it. And if you look at the media, the bigger media world, again, is it a conspiracy, or is it just the way business works when you have a capitalist system, right? Because we have all this consolidation now. What is it, like almost all media is owned by like 5 companies or something now at the big media level. So in order for them to have efficiencies of scale, they're kind of going to just come up with a message and kind of send it out to all these properties, right? And they also have business interests, right? The company that owns, the Chicago Tribune or whatever, owns a bunch of other stuff that doesn't have anything to do with newspapers. And those other businesses need to work with government and senators and the president and a bunch of other things, right? So their news media, the people writing the stories and the editors and what ends up in the newspaper, wants to be able to be favorable to the positions of all those other businesses they
Right.
own, right?
Yeah.
And so how direct is that? You can talk to different people about people that have quit from some of those platforms or newspaper agencies and so on, that say, yeah, it kind of got too much. We were getting too much pressure. But some of it is just the normal monetary stuff. Like they cut back journalists, right? So they're going to have less local journalism. So that creates a huge problem for us, because we have all these, what they call kind of news deserts. But even
Yeah.
without that, we just have less real investigative, because investigative journalism is expensive, right? But
It
this
is.
kind of
Yeah.
slanderous stuff, or not slanderous, but salacious stuff, is super cheap to do, right? So of course it happens.
Yeah. And so in some of this stuff, you had an episode called, I believe it was How Correcting Misrepresentations Can Heal Political Divides. And you were able to show how misconceptions fuel this fire as well, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the most promising a lot of, like I said, a lot of people are doing research in this space and trying to see are there some ways to kind of pull back from some of this hostility
Hmm.
and some of this tribalism. And that is one of the most promising ones when but it's hard to make it stick. So you got to, and it's hard to make it scale. But there are definitely people working on that, like coming up with ways to do that. But what a lot of this research has shown is that if you're able to lower those misperceptions of the other side, that lowers the temperature and makes people less hostile and less interested in doing kind of more extreme things. As an example, because otherwise it spirals the other way. Because the research has showed that if I think the other side is ready to, violate democratic norms, then I'll violate them first. Right. And then it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And pretty soon it's just spiraling, and each side is doing that, raising the bar one level each round, and it just keeps going downhill. But if you're able to remind them, no, they're not interested in that any more than you are, then, oh, okay, then I guess I'll be okay.
Yeah,
It kind of lowers the
exactly.
fear factor and that kind of thing. So that's one of the most promising things. And what are some ways to scale that and get us to appreciate that? But we don't want to oversimplify it either, because some of these things again do sound like kind of platitudes. Like, you often hear people saying we have more in common than we think, and that's true. But we also have a lot not in common. Like,
Sure.
if you throw two people in a room and tell them they have a lot in common, that may not be the way that conversation goes, right?
No, right.
Right. I mean, it certainly helps to, if you can get people to deal with non-political things first, like build a relationship around, I don't know, they go into a room, play and do gaming for a couple hours
Exactly.
before they talk about any politics. That'll probably be a somewhat of an improvement, because at least I know you now and we're having fun,
Yeah.
and I know you're kind of a regular person. So those kind of things can help, but we don't want to oversimplify it that, we have more in common. Okay, that sounds good. But like, how in practice does that affect how I interact with people from the other side and that kind of thing? So we have to keep that in mind. But yeah, lowering those perceptions is a big one. And and I'll tell you another intervention that is kind of, you might find a little surprising too, that I found surprising anyway when I discovered it. But and that's on the misinformation side. And there was all these different things people tried and tested to see if you could reduce misinformation spread, and fact checking, all that kind of stuff. The intervention they found to be the most effective at scale, and easiest to do, is an intervention that has nothing to do. I mean, it's just sort of random. Will put out a message that says, important, accurate information is important. It's not quite that simple, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
Very, it's neutral. Like, didn't say you were telling anything wrong. It doesn't say, the Democrats have all the facts, or it doesn't say the Republicans have all the facts. It just reminds us, oh, quality information is important, or accurate information is important, and they try to find the most neutral language to say it. Now, that little intervention made a huge difference on the amount of misinformation getting sent out. So imagine that, just the fact that people, just reminding people that accurate information is
Yeah.
important, did it in a nonpartisan way. And they're still studying sort of why it is. But I mean, I think a big piece of why it is because it just resets your brain a little bit, right? It gives you a minute to activate, the whole fast, slow brain thing, and the second half, the number system 1, system 2, and all that. I think it maybe gives you a little bit of time to activate that system 2 before that. You're talking about how the media wants to get you enraged, because that kind of deactivates system 2, and now I'm
Yeah.
only operating on my emotional
Exactly.
brain, and I'm going to overreact really fast. So if maybe that's it. I don't know exactly, but I think maybe that could be it. I mean, they're still kind of trying to study why that intervention works, but I find that super interesting that.
Yeah, that it really is something that simple can really improve the accuracy of the information that you receive.
Yeah. And that seems like a reasonable, like, thing that could really scale. So that's, something that I was encouraged by. So
Yeah,
like I said,
very
there are a lot of
promising
people
for
working
sure.
on this stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited by, the number of smart people, way smarter than me, that are sort of working on these problems. So hopefully we'll start to see some improvement. And I'm not being, Pollyannish about it. It's not going to be easy. It took a
No,
long
no,
time
this
to
is
get
not
here.
gonna happen tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah, it took a long time to get here. It's going to take a while to unwind it.
Yeah. And you know what, David? Like, one of the things that I notice too when we talk about these things is, occasionally we'll read headlines, right? Headlines seem to suck us in, don't they? And, you'll read a headline and you're like, man, all right, I'm ready to fight somebody. Then you read the article and you're like, well, that wasn't even that bad. So why do
Right.
we fall for that? Like, do you have any background on why we fall for that constantly?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it is clearly, that they well, for one thing, they, with headlines, especially online, which is how most of us are reading these things, those headlines are not written by the author of the piece anymore, right? Those are kind of written by the marketing department. In fact, they're written by algorithms essentially, right? So they A/B test all these different versions of the headline. I mean, first somebody, writes a white when they think it'll be emotional, right? They're looking for how to
Hmm.
get it. The original writer of the article might have written something pretty bland, right? And just kind of a down to the facts headline. But then the marketing department takes over and writes, this sensationalized one. And then
Yeah.
the algorithms, keep doing it. So, what that would typically indicate is that it's probably triggering all those emotions, right? Our amygdala getting
Yeah.
lit up and all those, sort of dinosaur brain points of our brain are activated. And so that it just settles on the one that's like the most triggering.
Yeah, and you know what? Even I could even see with, AI now, how you could take
Right.
a story and write it and say, okay, make this so it appeals to the emotions of readers, or make this so it's, I don't want to say clickbait, but you could technically say that, give me a catchy title for this so I could draw people in, and boom, it'll give you like 30 different titles,
Right.
it's,
So
yeah.
that's another key thing is like you got to go past the headline. There's
You
probably
do,
more.
you really do.
You
And
really
it's
do.
kinda like I say that about politics sometimes too, because we get for some reason, especially at the federal level, right? We get so outraged at things that happen on the federal level and, left, right, whatever it means. But in the end, when you really sit back and look about how you are personally affected, unless it affects your paycheck and taxes or something like that, most of the time, a lot of us are really not affected by the policies set in Washington. And that's just kind of an observation. I mean, I could be wrong. There might be people out there, but just from my observation, for the most time, yeah, I get amped up on things, but in the end, they change things. And unless it affects my wallet, I kind of really, it doesn't really matter. Right.
Well, I think one thing I talk about a lot on the show, and I've talked with a lot of guests about this, that, you know, we're so overly, and this comes back a little bit to the media thing we were talking about before, where we've lost local journalism. So these media conglomerates are giving us all these national stories. So we're getting agitated, like you said, about these kind of national things happening in Washington that, may or may not affect us that much, but there's probably a lot more going on in your town and in your community and in your
Exactly. Exactly.
and we don't get that write up about that because we're not hearing about it that much, right? So that's one thing that we talk about a lot in the show is kind of focusing locally. Like there probably is more stuff going on. I mean, maybe get involved in the school board, maybe get involved in the town
Yeah.
council, maybe try to see what's happening locally because that stuff can affect you a lot more
A
than a
lot
lot of this,
more.
what's going on in Washington, right? And
Yeah.
pick your battles on the Washington stuff, right? I mean, I think that's another big one that I've learned is that I don't know enough about all this stuff to start having a position on all these things. I don't
And
know them
there's
well
so
enough.
many. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's so many different topics that they handle at that level. And, it's just like I said, I don't want to downplay it to say that what happens in Washington doesn't affect us because, it does, it trickles down, right? Because if we cut funding at the federal level, what's that mean? Oh, the state's now not getting enough money. And if the state's not getting enough money, then the county's probably not getting enough money. And then the cities, whatever, are not getting enough money. So it can trickle down. So I don't want to downplay that, Washington is not important. But I loved what you said there about local because that is really what's going to affect you the fastest and probably the most, local and state.
Yeah, and the other side of that is I don't have much agency about what happens in Washington either, right? I mean, I have my congressman and I have a
Yeah.
senator, and that's about it, right? And I can write letters to other people, but I don't have my impact, my ability to impact what happens in Washington is much reduced compared to what my ability to, your local
Yeah.
people, you get to write them a letter, or you go to their office and talk to them. That's going to have a much higher chance of having something happen, and your vote locally probably can matter too, and you can go speak at the
Absolutely.
town council and all that stuff. So there's also the agency side of it. Like you have a lot more agency in what happens, what goes on in your local
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah. I love that. And, David, getting back to headlines, I'm just wondering, is there any outrageous headlines recently that you've seen that you're just like, wow, I can't believe that this happened?
Well, I mean, pretty much all of them, right? Because I
They
mean, if you
are.
look at the AP and Reuters are pretty good about keeping them a little bit more
Yeah.
balanced, or at
Tame.
least, yeah, more tame, more neutral. I don't know, neutral is quite the right word, but a
Yeah.
little
But
less
yeah.
sensationalized, right? And those are a little bit better. But pretty much everybody else's headlines, you're gonna go, darn, what happened? And you're gonna pick that thing up and like, okay, maybe I should slow down a little bit. Take it easy,
Yeah.
Tiger.
Exactly, exactly. Awesome. Well, David, I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about another part of your podcast because you have stuff in it like the Polarization Detox Challenge. Is that like a juice cleanse for your brain? Is that what this is?
Yeah, so that's with an organization that we work with, and what it is basically you sign up for like a daily email, and sorry, maybe it's weekly. Yeah, you sign up for a week, and it's like exercises that you do, and it's some of the same kind of stuff we're talking about, right? It's finding articles that there's this idea of like a steel man argument, right? So like instead of going out and trying to find the information that supports my thinking, I'm going to go out and try to find the information. If I was kind of had to, it's almost like playing debate with yourself, right?
Yeah.
If I'm going to debate the other side of this argument, what does that look like? And try to find the good arguments about it, right? Not just the sensationalized one that are easy to discount. Like on either side, you could go to a very partisan newspaper and probably discount that from either side. But try to
Hmm.
find the arguments, which is a little bit more work. I mean, it can be hard to find good, well-written stuff, but you can go to a Reason or a Wall Street Journal or something, that's a little bit more less likely to be the full-on like a Fox News, frankly, or
Yeah.
MSNBC version of the story, right?
Exactly. The two polar opposites, right?
Yeah. So it's things like that. So you go through those exercises, and at the end of it, they've shown that most of us really do think look at the world in a new way. We're sort of realizing the other side is maybe, especially my neighbors. I mean, I think that's one of the things that is a big concern for me. Like it's one thing to call these people you don't know very well in some other state evil or whatever, but
Right.
when you think your neighbor right down the street from you who has kids in the neighborhood, it's like they're evil because they voted this other way. Are they though? I
Yeah.
mean, don't you know them? Don't they have like like I say, like a lot of the same concerns you have? So I think that's where I really get concerned that we're ready to like walk over there and literally practically shoot our neighbors these days. That's how close we are to the edge in many cases.
Yeah, and you know what? And that seems to be the thing now. For myself, I'm individually a little different, and thank goodness I'm an individual, right? But like, I'll give you a perfect example. My neighbor across the street, we both had different yard signs in this last presidential election, and
Right.
but we've been friends forever. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, why are you supporting this candidate?" And I said, "I just want to understand." I said, "No, you vote for who you want to. This is a free country, right? I want you to have your freedom of vote." But it was good to understand and just have a good conversation to find out why they were voting the way that they were voting. And then of course, I provided my opportunities and said, "Hey, this is why I'm voting, and this goes more with my moral background and belief, or whatever it may be." But it was nice because we had a conversation. We understood where we were coming from, and neither one of us was wrong. But I think those are the types of conversations we need to have, is have an understanding of why people maybe do what they do, so we can see those things that are similar. And just understand that, yes, we're not all the same. So yes, if you're gonna put two candidates, people are gonna vote for each one, right?
Right. Well, I think
So
a key word that you mentioned there is understanding why they think what they think. Right. We don't, you know, we can throw facts at each other. We can throw Fox News talking points at each other all day long, right? But that's not really going to change our minds, and it's not going to help us. But if we try to understand more about their personal reasons for why they have certain views, right? And I think that's talking back about a lot of these one-on-one interviews I've done with regular folks, is that's a big piece of it, that people are almost shocked when you leave that door open and create the space for them to explain their views, and you don't push back and you don't try to tell them they're wrong. You just sort of listen, right? And people are so not used to that. Like
no, they're not.
you almost literally see the shock on their face when this, like they're kind of like waiting. Well, when's he gonna tell me I'm
Yeah,
dumb?
because yeah, right, David. Like, because if you talk with people, right, and we've seen, and I've fallen into this trap too. You start listening to people, and you hear like a talking point, right? What you consider a talking point, and then as soon as you hear that, you start thinking, "I'm going to rebut this." And that's, to me, that's where I need to say, "Hey, Nate, shut up, let them talk, and let's hear the whole thing. Then, if you want to bring your views in, that's fine, but respectfully."
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about there is exactly why this stuff gets hard, and it's not necessarily natural because, like you say, our more sort of innate interest is to do that. Like, oh, I picked that target now, because part of it is because we often go in these conversations with kind of a win lose attitude,
Hmm.
and we have to go into it more with the let's try to understand each other better attitude. I sometimes talk about it like, can you turn it into a detective story? Let's be on the same. So we have the same goal. We're both going to try to understand why we see this thing differently instead of
Yeah,
I'm going to
our
win, you're going to
motive, right?
lose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. What's our motive behind our ideas and understanding? And the funny thing that I've found, like with my neighbor across the street and other people that I can have these respectful conversations from, is they bring a viewpoint that I may have never even thought about my entire life. And when you look at it and you say, well, from your viewpoint and from your past, I could totally understand why you're voting this way, or vice versa. And so it is good, but one of the things that I've noticed is like for buddies that argue about, got into an argument about politics and now they don't talk, how do we fix that? You know?
Yeah. No, these are challenging problems, right? And when we talk about a lot of this idea of depolarization and bridge building, some of that language, it often starts. It's such a big problem. Like if you go into it thinking, "Well, I'm going to solve the world's problem," that's just kind of what I did. I'm naive. I'll go fix the world's problems, right? If you go into it with that, like you're not going to do that. Like it's not going to happen, right? You're not going to light the match that solves the problem. Probably, you might, maybe you will,
Right.
but what you can do is you can change it in these smaller circles, right? And you can expand out those circles, right? So you can change your own interaction with people you know. You can change and try to restore those relationships, try to understand better. And this works in your community, this works, in your church, those kind of things, right? So even if you're not solving the world's problems, you can do things that'll improve your life. But yeah, how do you do that? So how do you do that? Well, it's really hard, right? So because there's a whole bunch of prerequisites, right? You have to have a mindset that I think you have to be ready to walk away too. Like if I'm getting too triggered, I can't do it right now. Like we're going to have to move on. But let's agree to come back to it. But I'm going to have to drop out right now. I'm red in the face. I can't do it anymore today. So let's come back to it in 2 days. But you have to have there's some of its mindset and some of its attitudes. You kind of you have to be coming to the table with good faith. Like I'm not trying to win you over and you're not trying to win me over. We actually do have we're truly do want to understand each other better. Like if you pretend you want to understand each other better, but really you're trying to persuade them, that's not going to work.
That's not going to work. No.
People can see through you. It's not going to
Yeah,
work.
you're a snake oil salesman at that point, right?
Yeah. So it really, you have to kind of get that mindset up, and that's very unusual, right? We're not used to that. And it's not exactly natural. So it starts there. It starts with kind of mindset and intent. And I think intent is just such a huge factor in this. And if you have, the intent, if both sides have that intent, you'll have good outcomes. That doesn't mean you'll agree with each other,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
I think that's another thing people have to remember. Like go into this again, you can find yourself in this win-lose thing, but what people think sometimes is if I let them tell me their side, that means I agree with it, or they might change my mind. Well, they might, but you're not committing to
There's
that. You're not committing to
yeah.
changing your mind.
But even the fact of this, look at this, David. What's wrong with you changing your mind?
Right.
If it's
Right.
based on factual information and you say, hey, this aligns with my moral upbringing and beliefs, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. I mean, I look at an example, not to go one side or the other, but I mean, look at the vice president, for example, right? He was a never Trumper, and now he's the vice president of Trump. There's a guy who changed his mind, right? Because he saw what he says he saw the different things that he thought he had a good first term. So, not saying that's a perfect example, but there's an example of someone who changed their mind about something. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to go into these conversations with an open mind. We need to realize that, hey, we can disengage. And sometimes I've even done this with some folks that I know is that if politics is really a sticky subject for you and someone else, maybe just avoid it.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely there are situations where it makes sense to avoid it. And again, yeah, raising it is maybe not the best choice a lot of times, but avoiding it for everyone all the time is also not great.
No, and I
We have to
definitely,
get
yeah,
better.
definitely wouldn't say, but like say you have a family member, right? And you can't choose your family. That's the one thing you can't choose. So if you
Right.
have a family member and and they talk politics and you have different views and you guys are never going to agree, there's nothing wrong with saying to your, hey, Uncle John, I know you love talking about politics and we don't agree. How about we just don't talk about it around each other? But we could still be family and love each other on the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And you could also, depending on Uncle John and everything else, you can also try to set up that, that deeper conversation. Like, hey, when you want to
Yes.
talk about some of this stuff, maybe here's some framework. Are you okay with, or can we agree to these ground rules? If
Yep.
we both
Or
go in with
yeah.
these ground
And
rules, I'm happy to have
sometimes
that
there's
conversation.
right. Well, usually when we're having that conversation with Uncle John, right, we talked about like it's at Thanksgiving or at a family dinner or
All
something
right.
like that. So maybe there's an opportunity to talk to, to talk to Uncle John or the Uncle Johns of the world and say, hey, you know what? Let's have a one-on-one discussion where we could talk a little bit more intimately where not everybody else is listening to us, you know?
Right. We're not trying to show off
Exactly.
we're not
Doesn't
trying to
need to be a
perform.
family show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Those family gatherings are not really the place to have that conversation.
No, no. And I saw posts and stuff too, like where it said, people got so upset over this last election that they weren't going to go to Thanksgiving because they knew their family voted for Trump. And I'm like, why would you let one person ruin your entire family? So it's someone that's not even in your family.
Well, and of course it works both ways, but it can be difficult. I will say it can be difficult because we've made politics so salient in our lives, right? I mean, for some
Hmm.
people, not everyone, but for a lot of
No,
people, they walk into the room, they have their Trump shirt or their Biden shirt or whatever they might be, and and they just almost wear it just to see if they can rile people up, right?
I agree
And
with you. Yep.
and they just bring that as the first thing in their in their identity, right? Like, I don't even know who you are yet, and you've got this giant shirt on, these giant
Absolutely.
words on it.
Yeah. And especially if it's got the phrase of if it's got the MAGA phrase, right, then people might already be turned off on it.
Exactly. I mean, well, somebody's going to be turned off on it if it's that
Yeah.
bold and that
Yes.
strongly partisan, whichever side that somebody's on, right? So, you're kind of asking for, you really are,
You're asking for it. Yeah.
you're kind
You're
of a
now
troll.
you're the outrage producer, aren't you, at that point?
Yeah. And so that could be so it can be kind of hard. And I get it because, both sides do this. Both sides get kind
Mhm.
of vindictive and like, oh, my guy won. You're such a loser.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's kind
and
of
it's
like
like
what we do with
really
sports teams, except it's politics now, right?
and, we sit there and we do this stuff all the time, and we go back and forth, and this 4 years, it's you, this 4 years, it's me, oh, Congress, now it's, this party's leading it, that party's leading it, but, yeah, it's just a mess, and to ruin personal relationships over politics it just seems crazy to me.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of that is because we've moralized it so much, right? And we see
Mhm.
this as we've turned these into moral issues, and that really makes it tough. And because now it's sort of become, it's my identity, but it's also now like a moral value that I have, or I
Yeah.
perceive it that way. And so even just talking to you, like, is somehow violating a moral principle of mine, and then it gets really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, David, with you being in tech, because you had your past in tech, how much do you think this mess is tech's fault?
Yeah, yeah, it is to a large degree, especially once the like button basically happened. Um, that really changed things, right? Because that really did give them the feedback for this engagement, and then they could really start amplifying things once they kind of figured out how to use that math to
Hmm.
really push that. But and I think it is an accidental thing in many ways, but it's the social media side of it. Like, our brains are not wired for this disparate, broad, huge, millions of people world, right? Our brains are
Yeah,
wired to operate in little small groups, and where we have pretty close relationships, and we see each other and we talk to each other and we do these things. So we've thrown this kind of world at our brain that it's not programmed for, and it's obviously not working. It's not
yeah.
really difficult for us.
And you're absolutely right when you talk about, the little circles that we're in, and that comes back to what we talked about earlier, like local politics, getting involved there because it has more effect of us. But yeah, social media opened us up to all kinds of different information. Number one, information's instantaneous today, right? It wasn't like it used to be where something happens right now, you won't hear about it until tomorrow morning's newspaper, or until tomorrow's news show. But now, it's instantaneous. If something happens right now, within, probably a minute and a half, we're going to know about it if we pull up social media,
Yeah.
So that's something that I think we weren't really used to and having all this information overload as well. And I think, we spoke about algorithms earlier too. The more, when you hit that like button and hit the like button on something similar again, that algorithm just keeps feeding you more and more and more of that stuff you like. And then next thing you know, you're just like in an echo chamber, you know?
Yeah. And that's where that intentionality can be a big factor, right? Like, be intentional with how you use social media. Maybe set parameters around it. Like, I'm only going to use it for this many minutes during this part of the day. Don't use it when you're going to bed, right before bed. Like, these are not like, we know there's so much science around this, yet here we are, we do it anyway, right? But it's really bad for you. Like, I'm telling you right now, every listener, just put your phone on do not disturb whenever your bedtime is. Put that phone on do not disturb. Don't pick up your iPad or whatever other device. Read a book or just go to sleep.
Yep.
Just listen to some
Yeah.
music even maybe, but go to sleep without all the notification buzzes and the social media rallying you up, because there's so much research about this. We absolutely 100% know that part
Yeah.
is not a
It
good thing.
It is funny. I had a guest on a while ago, David, that he talked to me about what he called his puppy transformation. And what he would do is he noticed when he get into see a lot of these political stuff coming up in his feeds, he would go and search for puppies, and find like playful puppies or funny puppies. He's like, that way the algorithm would switch and stop giving him all that negative, political stuff. And then he'd start, being able to laugh and have a little bit more fun. But yeah, it is amazing that, they're really feeding on what we like, especially with the social media platforms to say, hey, if you like this thing, we're just going to keep giving it to you until you tell us otherwise.
And it's even, they even do stuff like people like you. So people that have liked, because you like this, other people also like this. So they also will do
Yep,
that, right? So now it's
exactly.
like these second and third order things that aren't even something you liked.
Yep, exactly. I know we talked about a couple of them, but David, do we know what the fix is? Like, do I just delete my phone and live in the woods, or what do you think from what and you've talked to scientists and stuff, so I have to assume they've offered some great feedback on this. But what are some practical steps to help get us out of this outrage overload?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is that intentionality, right? Trying to set that mindset of kind of a mindfulness about that this stuff is going on around you and you're being manipulated by all these, whether it's social media, whether it's TV media, whether it's politicians campaigns, if you get involved in those, if it's these activists and things like that. I mean, what do they say in these activist posts? Send $5 or like the world's going to end kind of thing, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, exactly.
and you're like, I sent $5 yesterday, it's still going to end.
Yeah,
It
exactly. Yeah,
never
they keep
ends,
bringing
right?
it up. It's like, wait, I just got to give you $5 every day. Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, I like that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's one is kind of that being mindful and having intent, being more intent, because this is where we're getting into trouble is when we're doing passive. Like, you were saying the cat thing. It's almost like you wish the social media services had like a passive mode where I'm going into dumb passive mode. I just want the cute stuff. Like, don't give me any of that other stuff. Just give me the cute stuff. Like, that would be then the passive mode would be, because a lot of times we're killing time. We want to be entertained, but then of course, what else is in there? It's all the stuff that's
Yeah,
going to rile you up too. And so,
exactly.
trying to be more intentional about it. It's hard though. I mean, the tools really make it tough to do that. Like, you can spend a lot of time tweaking your feet and all that, and pretty soon, it's like you're retiring because you spent so long screwing around with
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, and now you're like, "Well, now I'm too old to even see my phone." So,
Yeah, I can't even
right?
read it anymore.
Can't
Need a
even
new
read it.
prescription.
Exactly. So,
So
but
that's one thing. But
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say so definitely less screen time, I think is a huge thing that we're hearing here, right? Get yourself out of those screens. And I could definitely do that because, right, more time with your boys, talking to local people instead of, just being on that screen and going through those things. I can definitely get behind that for sure.
Yeah, and being more intentional about it, like maybe, like I say, setting aside a time during the day, or maybe setting a maximum, like I'm going to do 20 minutes, that kind of thing. And then also, like I said, that idea of the deep dive. Sometimes, like if you really feel like I want to understand a thing, pick something to deep dive on instead of, then that's going to take you away from the feed for a while, and you can go deep dive on that topic. And I
Yeah,
think the other thing about the idea of like our being so hostile and ready to be hostile with our political rivals, is it's just going to take, getting to know people better. And again, that can be something you can do locally. Like if you live in a purple neighborhood, get to know the purple people, right? I mean, get to know the people on the
absolutely.
other side, and, and see that they're for the most, yeah. Are you going to find crazy ones, quote unquote, your version of
Of
crazy?
course. Yeah,
Of
right.
course. But for the most part, that's the exception, right? We see that in the news. We see that that's what's highlighted of these sort of most extreme versions of people. But in real life, that's really not who real people are.
No. No, I agree with you because I know, so just so you know, David, for myself, I tend to lean to the right. I like to think that I'm an independent thinker, but my background, conservative background, is brought up, as a Christian and stuff. So there's some moral things that kind of lead me that way. But I always vote, with my what's going to be best for me, But what I've noticed is I live in a very or blue city, and most of the people around me don't generally think the same way I do. But I have great relationships with all of my neighbors, because I know that there's things that we could talk about, things that might be, I know there's one neighbor across the street that I probably won't talk politics because he gets really fired up, but there's another neighbor that we'll talk about all kinds of different things and we'll agree on a bunch of stuff together, but we'll still have, at the end, we'll still go our separate ways. So, but you're absolutely right. That's a great thing is I don't think people are getting out there and actually talking with real people face to face like we used to, you know?
Right. And we're a little bit afraid of it because we have we see these conversations online. We see how heated things can get. And we do, and so it can be a little challenging. There are groups, depending on how much effort you want to put in. There are groups, like I'm a moderator for a group called Crossing Party Lines, where we hold these moderated meetings. So I moderate, these calls just to keep the rules in place. I'm not trying to
Yeah, yeah.
control the dialogue. If anything, my biggest thing is to make sure all those views do get presented right and
Yeah.
fairly. Everybody gets some time, and that's all. And so then that in that environment, it really it really exposes you to people with these different views in sort of a controlled way, where I'm not going to let people
Yeah.
start insulting each other and stuff like
Yeah,
that as a
exactly.
moderator, but we can still have all those views shared, and you get an opportunity to actually listen and hear these different kinds of views, and then you get some practice with it, because like I say, we're so out of practice with it, right?
We
We
are,
stay
yep.
we stay in our bubbles. We usually talk with the people in our bubbles, and so we say like pretty radical things, and it's not really that radical. It didn't seem radical because our friends were sort of nodding their head agreeing,
You're
right?
right.
And so we just don't have a lot of practice with running into people with different perspectives on things. I mean, I've certainly learned that the degree to which two people can see the same event and see a completely different thing, like most of us just don't, because you just don't experience it because you're so used to being in your bubble, that how could anybody see what they saw? It wasn't like that. But I mean, those people exist, and you have to be sort of prepared for it, and appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's tougher too, I think, as we get older, to discuss things because I'll give you a perfect example, and not to polarize anybody out there, but if you would have told me 20 years ago, David, that people would be questioning what a man and what a woman are, I would have been like, Are you out of your mind? That'll never happen." You know what I mean? Just the fundamental, basic biology of a man and a woman, and we're questioning that now in a whole different manner that I never thought in my lifetime would ever become a discussion at all.
Well, I'll say I did a episode on that with a doctor who it was inspired by the Olympics, the boxing last summer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
Oh, yeah, yeah. From the they said was a biological male, but yeah,
the
through their
Paris
blood
Olympics,
test. Yeah.
and all that. Well, actually, I think you could. Yeah. Anyway, I talked in the beginning how I'm not certain. I'm very rarely certain about things anymore. And I will say, with what I learned about that, is it is pretty complicated, and it's hard. I kind of went into that before I even started researching that topic, thinking I kind of had a perspective of where I stood on things, but talking with these different experts, I kind of left there going, this is a hard problem, because particularly, let's say, in sports, right? Because there are these different medical conditions, right? That
Hmm.
that it's just relatively small percentage of problems. It's not as small as you think. Some of these cases occur like 1 in 10,000. So that means
Yeah,
there's a few
that's
of these people in your town, probably,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So it's not like, and a typical hospital will see half dozen of these a year or something like that, right? And these are really difficult things for parents to deal with. And there's things like Turner syndrome and some others where, because if you think about what happens in the birthing room, right? We choose, all we do is we just look at the genital organs and
Yeah,
decide
the
girl or boy,
anatomy.
right?
Yep, and yeah,
And pretty
exactly.
much the anatomy, and we pick girl or boy. But some of these people that have these various, what they call, differences in sexual development, this is at the biological level,
Hmm.
have, that they'll start going through them. They're females. They raised as female. They're brought up as female, and they live a life of a female, and then they have a male puberty when that time comes around, and that's very traumatic, right? Imagine
Well,
what that would
yeah,
be like, right?
absolutely.
And so, so there's things like that. There's these different conditions so it is more complicated, than.
Yeah, there are some medical anomalies out there, right? That we
Yeah, and
don't probably, like you just brought up, that I wasn't thinking of when I made that comment, but yeah, you're right. And I forget, I don't know if the term is still correct or not, but like hermaphrodites and things
yeah.
like that are born with both genitalia. And yeah, so there's it's funny we think about that, but and just as its root cause, to ask somebody what is a woman and then them not be able to answer is just weird to me,
And imagine the poor parent sometimes in these birthing rooms, like the
Yeah,
doctor. What's the first thing a parent asks? Is it a boy or a girl?
a boy
And
or
what if
girl,
the doctor has
exactly.
to say, "Well,
I'm
you
not
know,
sure.
yeah, we're not.
We'll have to
I
see
don't
how
know. We're
this
not
plays
sure."
out.
Those are difficult questions, but
Yeah,
and
they
even
are.
getting all the way up to getting all the way back to kind of the whole sporting thing. Like I thought I had
Mhm.
a strong position about that, but the more I learned, it's hard. It would be difficult. It's a difficult call because like somebody's getting excluded, right? I mean, the way you
Mhm.
could think of it as women's sport
Yeah.
because we've divided up into men's, women, and women's the women's sports is kind of a protected class, right?
Yeah.
That
Yep.
it's not fair to them if somebody that's gone through a male puberty is allowed to participate there. But then it's also not fair to that person that was kind of always a woman, raised a woman, and
Yeah.
played with did all the things, whatever women things, and now they're not allowed to participate there, and then they're not allowed to. So somebody's going to get kind of hurt by it, right? And that's when it does get complicated. I mean, I totally understand why. If I had a daughter or something competing in those sports, I probably would not be happy about somebody
Yeah.
that's gone through a male puberty. You're going to have like 20% more muscle mass. You're going to have more breathing capacity with your oxygen, way your oxygen,
Mhm.
how you can oxygenate, all that stuff, right? And so it probably isn't. So there's that, so that's not fair to them. But then it's also like, then it's also what do we do with these people, right? They want to
Yeah.
compete somewhere. So where do they compete? So do we need a third class? How does that look? Something like
Yeah.
that. So it's not as easy as I first thought it was when
No.
I.
No, exactly. And the other thing too is, like being raised as a girl because you thought, you were told by doctors that you were a girl, and then to have a male puberty, that to me almost seems like an exception. But, again, I don't
Right.
know, because I
It is,
think
well,
that a
like I
lot
say,
of the
it's like one
stuff,
in ten
yeah.
thousand. So it's not like zero. It's
Yeah.
enough that those people exist, and
Exactly,
there
but
there
it
are other
doesn't it seem
syndromes like that as well.
it does seem small enough, though, that it shouldn't be as nationally recognized as it is, doesn't it, though, David? I mean, it seems,
Well,
a lot of
it
times,
gets
like,
brought to the forefront. If you think
yeah.
about, like, I think specifically with, let's take, the boxer, back to the boxer again. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think that boxer is like guilty of anything. Like their country sent them there, and they probably knew what they knew this where this person was at, and but that person, as far as they're concerned, has always been female, right? That's their life that they've lived. As a biological female, as far as they were concerned, right? They always were. And so I don't really like, they weren't trying to screw anybody over. Like they just thought they were, I don't think, maybe they were, but like,
Yeah.
you could
Yeah, who
see a
knows?
situation where they
Yeah.
weren't, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what they were thinking, but I'm just saying you could see a situation where they weren't. They were just being themselves, and their country sent them there, and they show, and then they get put in the limelight. Like now they're at the center stage of this thing. Like you say, it's one in 10,000 people. Who knows how many people are, how many countries are sending people like with some of these conditions into athletics. But, you know, so yeah, so now what do you, but they're there. And I still feel like that, maybe there's something to do with them, but you're right. I mean, as should it be our forefront topic? But then what happens is all the misinformation, right? So you have
Yes.
all the people that said she
Exactly.
was all the people that said she was trans,
Born a
right? That she
man, or
used to
yeah,
be
or
a male
trans,
and
yep.
now became a woman, and there's apparently no evidence for that, right? That's just some made up stuff. But then that's what happens is we get all this weaponization of this stuff. It doesn't make, and instead of really dealing with a complicated problem that has real, like, these are challenges. Like we have to kind of come up with what's the best way to handle this. Instead of that, we're getting into all
Yeah,
these political fights about it, and then picking a side
exactly.
and saying I'm right and you're wrong on it. But yeah,
Yeah, and if you think about it, a lot of the stuff that we get outraged over is like really like a 20% issue, and I'm just going back. I know you're
or
a tech
less.
guy. Yeah, I know you're a tech guy. I'm a tech guy, and right, we generally try to solve for 80/20, right?
Right.
We try to solve for 80% because the 20%, we can handle as is. But it seems like from the country, as far as outrage, it seems like we're focusing on that 20%, and nobody's really dealing with the 80% that affects most of the people.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you still can't leave the 20% out, right? If
No, no, I'm not
we
saying that
don't
we
want to leave
do, but
people with
yeah,
different disabilities out, but yeah, I
but
get what you're
yeah,
saying. I think, yeah, the
yeah.
idea that we're not, yeah, we're certainly focusing on a lot of our sort of outrage and weaponization on some of these things, right? And Yeah, and that's an on yeah, that's an ongoing problem. I mean,
It is.
I think some of this is leftover things we probably should have resolved 50 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, because you sit there and you look at it and say, this is such a big deal, or it seems like such a big deal, when in reality it's not as big of a deal as, it's played out to be. And I think a lot of it comes back, as we talked about before, about social media, right? Bringing people up, having instant access to different news sources, and then only taking the things that, we may want to have. So that gives us an idea, like and this is why I loved what you said, David, about go out specifically on an issue and look for the factual information from what you would believe the other side to be, and see what those views are. And like you just brought up, I just talked about just man woman, right? That was I took a very basic, and you brought up some things that I didn't even think about. And that's why I love having conversations like this, even though they can be hot button topics. It's good to hear, because like I knew, you talked with experts and they give you a whole different thing, and you don't think about these things that biologically happen to people that might have been a woman that now they went through a male puberty, right? Because like you said, 1 in 10,000, most of us probably never heard of it.
Right.
But you're
Right.
right, they're there. So we shouldn't forget about them either.
Yeah, exactly. These are real problems. It's not like, we, like you say, you just got to throw them under the bus. They're not going to
Exactly.
deal with
And
you at
just
all
pretend
because,
it doesn't exist. Yeah,
yeah, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. But yeah, you're sometimes right. It can flip flop on where we focus all of our energy for sure.
absolutely. All right,
But yeah,
David.
that goes back to that point I was talking about at the very beginning about being certain about stuff anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, never
usually what I
certain.
discover when I'm certainly, when I'm really certain about something, that probably just means I don't know enough about it yet.
Exactly. Yeah, when I'm 100% certain about something, I know that I'm 100% certain to be wrong.
Pretty much. It
So,
seems that way
yeah,
sometimes.
it does. But excellent, David. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to test what I call your chill factor a bit. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions. I call it Dude Q&A. Super easy. It's just based on your background. So hopefully nothing's here that is alarming, or that you don't think, that you're gonna be like, why are you asking that? And if something is like that, then just, say, hey, I don't want to answer that, and we won't
I get
answer
the
it. So
pass button.
yeah, exactly. So first question, most outrageous thing you've seen on Twitter this week?
You know what? I'm really not hanging out on Twitter very often
No?
anymore. No, but there's probably some social media thing I saw. Yeah, I see so many because I kind of observe a lot of this just to see what's going on out there. Yeah, I can't think of any one really standing out. I think, what did I see? I think I can't remember now for sure what it was, but there's so many that crossed my radar. I can't pick one
Yeah,
out.
no worries. I'm sure we'll find probably 20 before, the end of the week. So,
Yeah, I could probably scroll right now and find you one.
oh yeah, I'm sure. So now, because you've been in the outrage industry, and I don't mean that you've been causing outrage, but trying to understand it, from what you've seen, out of left wing or right wing outrage, which appears to be louder at this time?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of research on this, and and you have the right side seems to really have really dominating a lot of the social spaces right now. Particularly, like there's a lot more sort of podcasting and alternative media voices from the
Hmm.
right now. The left kind of has not, figured out how to leverage that as well. And so you're seeing that. I think, and if the question is who's more extreme, that's a tougher one. I think that they're both similar in some ways. I think the right, you'd have to argue, does have more characters that do more sort of outright, false misinformation
Hmm.
stuff.
Hmm.
But both sides have a lot of the same tendencies.
They
No one
do.
really.
Yeah. And I will never be, as I say, I'm a person that tends to lean to the right. I will never be one that says the right is better than the left, because, again, I lean, but I tentatively try to go what's going to be the best for what I think is going to be the best for the country, myself, that type of thing. But yeah, I wasn't trying to get who's the worst. I just wanted to say, who seems to be the loudest at this point. So, because I don't want to discredit anybody on the left, and I don't want to discredit anybody on the right, because I feel like we can learn so much from each other if we just have
Well,
that open dialogue.
I'm okay discrediting them all, especially if they're more extreme. Well, I
I
mean, just
gotcha.
discrediting them equally, more or less, right? I mean,
Yes,
or
I
fairly,
gotcha. Yep.
fairly at least. I'm not afraid to discredit either side fairly.
Yep, I gotcha. If there's one app that you could delete to save humanity from outrage, do you know what it would be?
Wow, because yeah, they're all pretty bad. I mean, Twitter has gotten to be a lot worse. I mean, Twitter right now is pretty bad, but it's happening everywhere. But yeah, I would say Twitter's one of them that would maybe be near the top of my list because it's so popular too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is, and it's you're right. You can go on there and you can see both sides. Don't get me wrong, but it's definitely you're seeing a lot more from the right. I think right now on them
Well, not only that, you're just seeing much
and
more
the outrage
toxic
instead.
stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I mean, some of the stuff I was on there earlier today and some of the stuff I just was scrolling and just shaking my head going, "Really? Come on." I mean, common sense tells you this isn't true, you know?
Well,
But
and it gets personal so fast, and it
oh
gets
my gosh.
yeah.
'Cause, like, could you think, David, and this is what I always go back to, when we were kids, when we were younger, if you said some of the things to someone's face that people now say to you online, that would end in a fight, in a physical fight, right? And it's like, that's where I think the social media has taken away that personal aspect, because if you and I were to meet, or me and someone else, let's say we're fighting on Twitter, we were to meet in person, I guarantee you that person probably would not say what they said on Twitter to my face.
Right. Yeah, the norms are so different in real life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the stuff that happens and it's almost like social media encourages some of that behavior, right?
Yeah, they really do, they really do, yeah. Um, from your podcast, Outrage Overload, have you had a funny guest moment yet that kinda
Yeah,
sticks out to you?
yeah, we've had a few. I mean, I think one is when things just got kind of off the rails on a conversation, and we had to go. And but it actually became a lot more interesting after that, right? Because I had a guest that, well, kind of out of the blue said something like, "Well, then it got difficult," or something like that, so I'm like, "Well, yeah. What do you mean I don't want to talk about that? I absolutely want to talk about that. What happened? What was the difficult thing?"
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Those are the conversations we need to have, right, to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, final question for you. You're stuck in an elevator with Elon Musk. What do you say to him?
There would be a lot I'd wanna say. And the challenge with Elon Musk for me is I don't see him as, like, a sincere person, so it would be hard to feel like I'm gonna have a actual dialogue with him, but, yeah, I'd probably say, "Who hurt you?" No, that's not fair. That's not fair. I wouldn't
I
say that
got
in
you.
real life.
No, that's funny. Yeah, well, that's it. You survived the dude Q&A. Like I said, it's usually not bad. I just like to ask a few questions just to get, some so we can find out a little bit more about you, David, as opposed to just your podcast. But thanks for enlightening me with my dude Q&A. But obviously this is for me this has been awesome, David, because you've given me some different viewpoints. We've discussed what the outrage overload is, and talked about your podcast, some of the outrageous things we see, how to have good conversations with each other. But it's truly been awesome. And I want to give you an opportunity. Is there any last word for our dudes and dudettes out there that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of just to take a step back sometimes, like, may not be as bad as you think. Take a step back and reflect a little bit, look inwardly.
Yeah. Awesome. And where can our listeners go to find you, David?
So all the links and the contact info and all that stuff is at outrageoverload.net. All my contacts info's there, all the socials, which are at outrage overload everywhere, but also my email and all that. And I answer every email I get.
Excellent. Yeah, that's nice. I try to do the same thing too, David. It's I like to have good interactions with people because I feel like we get a lot of great ideas from our listeners, and they tell us really what they want to hear and what our next thing is up. But no, I love that, David. And just so you know, and so everybody else knows on the show, David's going to have a guest spot on my web page as well, justadudepodcast.com. So David, your photo will be there with all your links, all your socials, anything that you put in. So justadudepodcast.com, you can find all of David's information there as well. So David, again, thank you so much for joining me. Is there, I want to give you a last opportunity. Anything else that you want to discuss or talk about before we depart?
No, I just want to thank you for the conversation. It was fun, and I enjoyed it a lot. And thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, David, thank you so much for joining me. And I look forward to this going out for our listeners to hear it, because I think this is the conversation that we really need to start having in this country, because I think we could do so much more if we understand each other instead of being polarized.
Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Well, David, thank you so much. And that's it for today, dudes and dudettes. If you liked this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button, tell a friend, and maybe don't yell at them over politics. Until our next episode, keep learning, keep growing, and keep being just a dude or a dudette. I'm Nathan, and I'll catch you next time on Just a Dude Podcast.